There's burnout at the beginning. There's burnout when we're trying to get the flywheel going and get our systems in place and get our business to a place where we believe and see that it's sustainable. And then there's a burnout in trying to scale it.
Usually organizations who are training you and doing all these things, they want you to think, and that gives you unrealistic expectations a lot of times.
I think where the burnout comes in is when that uninformed optimism bubble gets burst and we realize that we didn't have all the information, we didn't have all the pieces, and our optimistic goals are not being realized in the time frame.
Anybody who's thinking about jumping into the coaching business or starting part-time, think of it long-term. Think of it the sustainability. What's your runway?
What's up, Coaches Nation? Welcome to another amazing episode of the Coach's Journey podcast. I am here with the gentleman who's not smiling yet, Faisal Insan, who has been coaching for over a decade. And myself, Dr. Sherry Flewellen, I have been a psychologist for almost 2 decades, have been in the coaching world for about the last handful of years. So kind of combining all of that experience. Our podcast today, which is the Coach's Journey podcast, we are going to explore navigating business burnout, because the last thing that we want for you and for us is to spend all of this time growing and building our business as a coach to find ourselves in the position where we are frustrated and at our wits' end, overworked, overwhelmed, whatever kind of emotions lead into the idea of burnout, and just getting to a spot where you're like, I can't do it anymore for whatever reason. So that is what we are going to talk about today. How can you be proactive? How can you recognize if you're headed down that path? How can we avoid that? Ultimately, that's what we want for you, for us, for all of the amazing coaches that do good work in the world. So that is our topic today. Super excited to talk about it. So
Me too.
Faisal, anything you want to add before we dive in?
I would say I wish I had heard a coach who has been doing this for a while had talked about this, what it looked like in the beginning stages. Because I mean, whether you are burnt out or not, the whole process of building a business can be incredibly overwhelming for
Yes.
almost any person who's never built a business, I would say, or even somebody who hasn't built this kind of business, because it's very different, and there are a lot of things in there that we overestimate ourselves in a lot of ways. We are not aware of certain things that we need to do, and we don't have a frame of reference, so we think that we're the only ones struggling, but that's not the case. And to make it worse, almost, if you're part of a community or a certification or something, apparently everybody's doing better than you all the time. And you're always looking to yourself like, what the hell am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? So we want to kind of dispel, like, talk about the reality of what actually happens when you're starting a business, and how can we set some realistic expectations, and how can we move through it without burning out? Because if you burn out and you give up, then there is no business. And most of the reason why people don't have a business is because they end up giving up. Either through the process of them not being able to sustain it because they don't have enough money coming in, or just emotionally burnt out, or other life circumstances that takes them away because they just can't focus on this anymore.
I don't know if you know this, Faisal, but I have totally had burnout. And it completely changed my life, and it was not enjoyable. It was the most miserable experience literally of my life up to this point. Now reflecting back, and we can unpack that a little bit. Reflecting back, I think as a good mindset coach, I need to take my own medicine. And so I when I look back, I'm grateful for what happened, because I would not be where I'm at today had all of that not happened. But I definitely wouldn't ask for that again. And so it's been interesting as I've reflected, because it's been about 6 years, 6.5 to 7 years now since I hit that point. And yeah, I think there's definitely some lessons to be learned, definitely for me, that I've learned, and I would love to share those with other people as well, to make sure that they can kind of see the signs and get the support they need before they kind of get to that slippery slope where it just feels like there's a point of no return.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've actually seen many coaches who have given up at the process, and I've come very close to the point where I'm like, I don't know if I can sustain this, and I'd say this would be one of the most common thoughts for coaches who are starting out in the beginning stages, where they're constantly doubting themselves, they're doubting the process, they're doubting whether or not this will work because it's a very unknown territory and can be very unpredictable as well. So maybe addressing, maybe you can get started with that. Is like, how can we get started with some of the symptoms of what might be showing up if you're getting close to that burnout, or you've already burnt out in that process and not recognizing what's happening? Because a lot of times we try to look for even as coaches, we look for things that we're doing wrong on the external, but a lot of it might be internal in nature. We haven't addressed those, or it could be external circumstances too.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, because my burnout was not beginning stage burnout. And I think there's different types and reasons that coaches can potentially burn out through the trajectory of their career. So there's burnout at the beginning. There's burnout when we're trying to get the flywheel going and get our systems in place and get our business to a place where we believe and see that it's sustainable. And then there's a burnout in trying to scale it. My burnout happened with the scaling piece. And so maybe we can separate out the conversation to those two separate pieces. So we can start at the beginning phases for coaches that are still kind of working on getting all their systems implemented, and the burnout that can happen there, because I think they're two,
Yeah.
they may have a similar solution, but they're two very different processes, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm just kind of thinking through the differences. So maybe let's start there.
Yeah, for sure. We can start in the beginning, and I would bring the focus to the reason why I'm talking about the business side, because the rest of the process of coaching, yes, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of skill building and everything else, but to most people, it's fairly common sense to build. They need to practice, they need to get feedback, they need to do all that stuff. Now, whether or not a coach does it or not is a different story, but the main area that I've seen almost every coach struggle with, they're not business savvy, they don't have skill sets in the business area, they haven't run a business in the past. It's not that they don't know what to do, they have no idea how to even approach it. And no matter how much information you have in fact, the more information you have in the beginning, the more overwhelmed you're probably going to get because you don't know how to implement it. And that was the process when I started out. When I jumped in, I mean, my idea was to just become I wanted to help people. I wanted to work with people. And even though I heard people say you need to build a business, it didn't register at all. Like the first couple of years, it didn't actually quite register that I'm building a business. Even though I'm thinking about it, it's very odd. The main thing that registered was that, oh, I need to get clients. But that doesn't define even a fraction of what a business might be. And it doesn't help me understand how to move forward. And so the burnout can happen because you don't even know the path that you're going on.
Exactly.
You're so overwhelmed by the information that's coming in that's not making sense to you that and the only thing we end up doing is keep going back to what we know, whatever we're comfortable with. And what we know and comfortable with is to learn more, get more theory. And this is the reason why a lot of coaches go into going into courses more, reading more, and because that's what they know. And as soon as the time comes to implement and actually build their systems around sales, around marketing, and other things, they will procrastinate. They will move back, or they will refocus their efforts in another area, or they'll say, well, maybe I need a different plan, or maybe I need to go through another course to do this. But the reality is that they don't know how to approach it. And I think the starting problem happens is because they haven't acknowledged and somebody hasn't helped them understand that it's going to be a longer journey than you think, and a lot of that comes from the unrealistic expectations set and from the beginning, from the marketplace. And who sets those expectations? Usually it's marketers or people who are marketing coaching business as a way that, hey, you can make 6 figures in the first year.
Yeah.
But again, reassess and see where you're at, because your journey will be very different than somebody who understands marketing very well, for example, somebody who's had a sales background, for example, somebody who's built other online businesses, somebody who's had a marketing agency, very different journey than you. And I started out completely like not knowing any of it. I didn't understand business. I've never run a business. I barely had a career before that. I just had gotten started. So I was new to all of it. So I didn't understand any of it. And then there are different levels of it. Some people have come from very successful careers into coaching. Now they're expecting they should have the same level of success in the first year or so just because they have experience in another area. Yes, some things are transferable, but not all of it. So maybe we can explore. I know you came from a very successful path as a psychologist, and your burnout happened around the scaling piece of it. But what has been your initial experience like, and what have you
Yeah.
seen with coaches around you?
Yeah. So everything that you're talking about, Faisal, just to give a context around that, if Alex Hermosi, which we love listening to here at CMC, he has a word for that, and it's called uninformed optimism. So there's a path of entrepreneurship, and at the beginning stages of our coaching journey, we have uninformed optimism. We are optimistic, we're excited, we can hit that six figures in the first 3 months, and we're excited. And I think where the burnout comes in is when that uninformed optimism bubble gets burst, and we realize that we didn't have all the information, we didn't have all the pieces, and our optimistic goals are not being realized in the time frame. And so then, as Alex talks about, we move from uninformed optimism to informed pessimism because now we're like, the veil has been removed and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so much different or so much more work than I thought. So I think that is the shift when a lot of people get burnt out. And so they stay in that uninformed or informed pessimistic stage and think, okay, this is what it's really like. I can't do this. I can't continue. Uh, and I think the solution for that is being in community. Because if you don't have anyone else that you can see behind the curtain on and see how it is they've actually created their successful business, or how it is that they actually made their first year in full-time coaching, how they were able to make that happen, and however it ended, if you don't have that real life information and not just the Instagram posts from coaches, spouting off maybe what they said is true, but you don't know the whole story behind it. It's that whole idea of an overnight success taking 10 years. We see the overnight success, and it's really been an accumulation of 10 years of drudgery and hard work and just being all in on this stuff. And so I would say recognize that there is a normalcy to this pattern of having that optimism and then kind of being overwhelmed with a pessimism. But the solution really is being aware and in community with people that are doing this so that you don't have that pessimism in kind of your own mind, not being fed by people that can help you through it and out of it and kind of normalize back into optimism, but it'll be informed this time. Like, kind of what to expect in a more realistic way.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that we have the solution. The coaching mastery community is the solution for burnout at the beginning stages, because we have a whole community of coaches that are in the trenches doing the work at
Yeah.
various stages of their journey. And so being in that sort of environment really is critical.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you brought up is that there are two pieces you talked about. One is awareness, and the other one is being in a community, and it's really important. First of all, I think anybody who's listening to this, check in with yourself. The awareness piece is really important. Or do you feel frustrated all the time? Are you always doubting yourself and your path forward? Or are you feeling overwhelmed by all the things that you don't even know what they are half the time?
Yeah.
Are you procrastinating a lot? And like these are signs and symptoms of you being in a space where you feel isolated, you don't know what to do, and you don't feel safe enough to move forward. And that's very normal for human beings. Human beings don't operate very well in isolation. It requires a lot of training for you to be in. This is why we actually study people who are like monks and hermits and those kind of people, because it takes a lot for somebody to go out there alone in isolation, be like that. We even admire people like that. It's like, who was it? I think Joe Rogan in one of his stand-up comedies, like, you know what's the worst form of punishment we have? Is we take people who are among murderers and rapists and all that stuff, and we take them from there and put them in isolation. It's not to be among the worst people or among us, but it's to put them in isolation even from
Yeah.
that context. Why? Because our mind can't handle it.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that I've heard over and over from coaches is that they feel isolated, they feel alone because we go, how do we, a lot of us get trained either online or in person, or we find resources to do this, especially if you're in a conference or you're among comrades, other people who are doing this, you're excited, you want to jump in, you want to do this. And all of a sudden you go back home, you're in front of your computer, you're excited to do this the first day, second day, third day, and you do a bunch of stuff and you run into a problem. And then you go into research more again. And then pretty soon you realize, okay, I can't make heads and tails of this. This looked much simpler around other people. Guess what? Your human emotions are coming into the picture. It's still simple. You're getting overwhelmed. You're not
Yeah.
among other people who are actually doing this, who can give you a frame of reference. And by the way, this is a human thing. It's not even like a business thing. Like if you think of a normal human community, you're among people who are, some people are a little bit younger than you, some people are the same age as you, some people are older than you. You rely on people who are your comrades to keep you challenged, supported. You're competing with them. You are supporting people who are a little bit behind you, who are younger than you, and you're seeking wisdom for people who are ahead of you. Now we're talking about age, but in terms of skill sets, that's true in business as well. So what happens in community, and what Sherry is referring to is that it's not just any community. It has to be a community of coaches who are actually moving their business forward. Not a certification kind of community where people are thinking about being a coach, or they have been trained in different modalities and they're considering, or they're using it for different purposes. Because some coaches will use it in their workplace and other for other needs they have, or some people use it just for themselves. I know coaches who just get trained for the sake of developing their own awareness, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're not around people who are actually building businesses, so they're going through the process and the challenges, and they have similar questions as you, and they are going through the same struggles that you, now, even though you have the same problems, one, you don't feel alone in the process. You feel like, oh, okay, you have similar challenges. If they have worked it out, I can work it out. There are other colleagues and people who are going through the same process. You've seen other people who've come up with the solution. So now you have a frame of reference, and somebody can give you, yeah, you don't need to focus on this stuff. Just focus on this other thing if somebody's ahead of you.
Yeah.
And that's what ends up happening in our community. A lot of times we go on our live call, a coach will be like, I'm overwhelmed with this, and the other. And as soon as we go into the conversation, it simplifies very quickly. Why? Because they're doing unnecessary things a lot of times, or they get getting overwhelmed by their emotions, but it has nothing to do with the business piece of it, or they're
Yeah.
not tracking something, or they don't have much data around what they're trying to do, or they haven't tried something long enough. These are the things that come up that you need to be in consistent conversation. And for us, it doesn't just come up in sessions. You can reach out to us. You can connect with us. Hey, I had a question in between sessions about, I reached out to this person. This was the response. I didn't know how to respond. How do you do that?
Yeah.
Like, these things require you to be among other human beings. And trust me, the path of business is hard enough on its own. When you're isolated, it makes it 10 times harder for any human being. It doesn't matter where you are. Now, you might notice that some people can do this in isolation, not because they can do this in isolation, but because they have had the skill sets. They have a frame of reference. They might have a team around them that you don't know anything about, like Sherry said. They might be putting Instagram posts or sharing wins, but with no context whatsoever. One of the things that I always do, because I hated that in the beginning when I was starting out, whenever I would go into a certification community, somebody would have, I just got 5 clients and we just finished the certification. Like, how the hell did you do that? I just got this. So I always give context as to, at the end, I always, I've been doing this for a long time. This is not a win out of nowhere. I've been practicing this. Like, I always give that. And maybe that's my own personal thing, but I don't want somebody to think that, oh, I just got in and I got a bunch of clients, because that's what everybody wants. That's what usually organizations who are training you and doing all these things, they want you to think, and that gives you
Yes.
unrealistic expectations a lot of times.
Yeah. one of the, to get specific, one of the, I think, points of burnout that we see a lot in the coaches that we get to interact with around with the coaching mastery community are coaches that go all in on coaching as a second, third, other career, which is fine. For some people that works, but what we see a lot is they jump into coaching, they're burning the ships, burning the boats, that, like, this is all I'm doing. And they don't have a full grasp of what the runway realistically is for them to get their coaching business to be profitable. So
Yeah.
now they're 3 or 4 months in. They, as Faisal alluded to, they're, if you're not sure where to spend the time on building your business, often we get stuck in that mental masturbation where we learn more, but we're not doing more, because doing is where the learning is really the most impactful. So we're doing certifications, we're reading, we're doing all these things, but we're not actually doing the work to build clients. So then 3 to 4 months down the road, they're in a position where they're like, I'm out of money. Like, I don't have enough money to continue to do this full time. Now they're starting to panic and they're in scarcity mode. Maybe a spouse is frustrated because they're not bringing in the income that they said they were. Like, there's just a lot of dynamics that can play, but it's all based on a lack of a understanding on the runway that needs to happen typically for the coach in the beginning stages. So they hit a brick wall really quickly because they've run out of resources, or they feel like they've run out of resources. Their expectations, the expectations of how this was going to go, are completely shattered, and that's a dangerous place to be. So being able to be around coaches that can bring you a dose of reality and can support you in making sure you are doing the right thing. So maybe your expectations are more likely to be realized in the time frame that you want or that you need. That's so, so important.
Yeah, for sure. And it also speaks to sustainability in terms of one of the things that I've learned when I used to have a job, when I used to work for somebody, I feel like I never thought. Like I relied on this big entity who thought for me, and I relied on this paycheck every now and I was never taught to think about finances that way. But the more I've been in business, the more longer term you have to think.
Yeah.
And so business requires sustainability, and it requires long-term thinking. For one thing, even if you look at short-term, if you have a business, you don't have a reserve of at least 6 to 12 months, you're internally screwed because you're always thinking about money, but you have no idea what's happening. You're always in hustle mode. You don't have a structure. You don't have a strategy. You're always trying to survive. But long term, if you don't have a strategy long term, 10 years out, like investors, I love how investors think about this stuff, is that you're thinking 10 years out, like what are your assets? What are your investments? Where is your cash flow coming in? Where are you going to be then? And I started thinking more and more about business like that, is okay, where am I going to be in 10 years? And how can I be safe and secure? And this, one of the perspectives I heard about money is that we associate our nervous system needs safety to function in a good way. Now, here's like safety is one of the most important things. So, for example, if it's a need that we have as human beings, if we didn't feel safe in this environment right now, I wouldn't be in a relaxed state talking to Sherry and talking to you guys in here. If there was an earthquake that happened here, I'd be taking off from here. I wouldn't even tell Sherry what's going on. Or if I heard that, if I got a text or something that my family was not safe, like I wouldn't be here. Like, say, and a lot of times human beings, because we live in a monetary system, we associate our safety with money. That's a very common thing. I don't care if you like money, you don't like money. We just live in that system where money is associated with our internal sense of safety. And in business, what ends up happening is that if you don't feel a sense of safety in terms of that, whatever that is, for different people is different. Everybody has different risk level around that. But if you don't feel safe, you're always going to be in survival mode. Now, when coaches come in and jump in, they're starting a business. First of all, they don't have a runway. They don't know what their runway is, and they're thinking in their mind, they're told that within 3 months you're going to make a 6-figure business. That's a completely unrealistic expectation, and they don't know what it looks like. And if they burn out boats, oh my God, I have can you hear that?
No,
You can't hear anything?
no.
It is loud. It's the my lawn guy came in at this time. But anyway, I'll try to speak over it. It's allowed for me. But so as soon as coaches come in and they burn all boats and they're expecting that within 3 to 6 months they're going to build a sustainable business, one, that's unrealistic. And I, by the way, I did that. I've gone through that process. I left a whole career, I jumped in, I knew I needed. I had to start driving Uber to sustain myself, and I realized pretty quickly, no, this is gonna, actually not pretty quickly. Within the first year, I realized that, oh, I need to be doing this. I can't be in a hurry to build this business.
Yeah.
It will take as long as it takes until I understand the process, because I just don't understand it enough. Once I got to that point, then I started thinking more long term, like, okay, what can I do that sustains me and my family while I'm building a business? And how can I, even when I start getting clients, for example, how can I build a long enough runway so I don't go in survival mode when I do go more towards business? And as a business owner, what is the value of having a business? It's actually time freedom more than anything else, is that you get to use your time in any way you want. And this is why I always encourage anybody who wants to go in business, find a strategic way to jump full-time into business as fast as you can, because you will go towards opportunities that you've never had without it when you're working for somebody else. It's not about the money. You might actually lose money in the beginning, but the opportunities are different. So I want you, anybody who's thinking about jumping into the coaching business or starting part-time, think of it long-term. Think of it, the sustainability. What's your runway? And I would say, give yourself at least a run. If you've left a job, you need a runway of at least 1 to 2 years if you're going to full-time do this, even because you don't know when it's going to pick up, depending on your skill sets. Or if you have, ideally, you have something you're doing on the side and you've dedicated at least 10 to 15 hours or 10 to 12 hours for this. And I want to go a little bit into the structure of what that looks like, but sustainability is everything. If you give up, and most business owners will give up within 2 years, then there is no business.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can sustain this longer than that, more than likely you've learned the skill sets, more than likely you've built a network around you, more than likely you've got enough referrals, and that's exponentially building up. There's a compound effect that's starting to happen in your skill sets and your network and all sorts of things. So that's sustainability makes a big difference.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of having poor expectations about what really coaching business is. I think the other aspect for me that is important in preventing burnout is really being clear on the motivation for coaching. Because, I mean, we see this time and time again in stories, people's stories all over the place, that when they are unequivocally devoted to a mission, they will do and figure out any way to win. It doesn't matter. They'll go over the wall, they'll go around it, they'll dig under it, whatever. And so really being clear and on how powerful your motivation is and the reasons why you're doing this, I think are a really critical reason to sustain yourself when things aren't going the way that you wanted or the way that you expected. So that would be a kind of another angle to consider and to work on bolstering.
Yeah, for sure. And you're pointing out to honesty. And I think one of the most difficult things for us to do as human beings is to be honest with ourselves. And it's like two people that helped me understand this very well. One was Alan Watts, the other one was Carl Jung. Is why are you truly doing this thing? And we can tell all sorts of stories about something, but the reality comes in when the rubber meets the road and you run into challenges. It shows up in all parts of our life, like in our marriage. Like, why do some people stick to a marriage despite the challenges, despite the struggles, because they're clear about why they're with that person. They feel that connection. They knew why they got into it. It wasn't just for the sake of just being with somebody versus somebody else who might leave the marriage just the first couple of signs of trouble. It's not easy, for example, to be in. Same thing with business. And also looking at this, if you're looking at this from an honesty point of view, is what is your why and what is your motivation to be in this? And it can't just be, oh, I'm making a bunch of money, because there are a lot of ways to make money. Yes, you need to make money in this, but can you sustain this long enough? And there's a quote by Alex Hermosi that says, missionaries always beat mercenaries.
Yes.
And who are missionaries are those who have a higher level of conviction and purpose in what they're doing. And so, for example, when I started out, I remember I've shared this before, but one of my closest family members around me in the first couple of years, we got into an argument. And he's like, I don't even know why you're doing this thing. You quit your engineering career. You jumped into this path where you're not making a dime, and you're making everybody around you nervous. It's affecting this and that and the other. Is I mean, it wasn't his business, but it hit me in a actually very positive way, what he said. I thought about it. I'm like, he's right. I haven't made much in my business and I have been struggling. And it does affect my family. It has affected my marriage. It has affected how I approach certain things. Why am I still in this? And I thought about it, and the thought that hit me was, you know what? I don't care. I don't care if it takes me 2 years or 10 years to make this happen. I'm making it happen because it's personally important to me. I want to work with people at this level. And I want to support people, and I want to build a business that's aligned with my path, and I want to grow in this world, and I will make it happen one way or another. It might take a little bit longer, but I don't care how long it takes. And I literally responded to that person that way. And if you don't like that I'm doing that, you're welcome to not be in my life. But this is what I'm doing. To me,
Mm.
that solidified something that I knew was real for me. And after that, I felt like I actually didn't care. And that actually led me towards building a structure as well, which I was referring to, is that as soon as I recognized that in myself and I looked at it as a longer picture, as something that I'd be doing, whether it's working tomorrow or in 5 years, now, how can I make this more sustainable? That's where structure came in. That's where strategy came in for me, is how can I create a structure where, regardless of what's happening, I'm dedicating a certain amount of time in this and I'm doing things that will actually move the business forward. That's where real change started to happen for me. And I was day in, day out, I was just putting in time and energy, and I was
Yeah.
iterating.
Yeah. So I want to highlight something that you said that I also think is a critical component of the recipe for not burning out. And that is really being clear on our boundaries and increasing our boundaries and awareness around where we need the boundaries. And what you said, Faisal, is you recognized that what this person said to you had a really strong impact on you. You chose on how it impacted you. And then you also realized that if you continued to listen to the negative spin that they had on what they told you, that would probably have a negative impact on you. And so you set a boundary and you're like, you're welcome to be in my life if you want to, continue to watch and support me. But if you don't want to support me, then see ya. Or, then we'll minimize contact, whatever the scenario is, of course, depending if it's family or friends, like we all have to make those decisions. But that's really important. And I think it highlights one of the importance, like we talked about the value of being with a community of like-minded coaches that are really working at building business, because it's providing that input of positivity and support. But we also need to recognize that they're in the back end. We may have people in our lives that are ruining that positivity by their negativity and their pessimism and the negative emotional suck that they have in our lives. So when you notice those people, we have to make a decision. And if you want to give and you're set on giving coaching, your everything, meaning that you are devoted to making it work, however long it takes, whatever it needs, you will stick with it and you will do it. We have to limit the negative energy suck, or the negative energy/energy suck that people have in our lives. And so making some hard decisions in that, I think, is a huge piece of that.
Yeah, and it's so important because, and especially something like when I was starting out almost a decade ago, I mean, nobody knew what the hell coaching was. I mean, now it's becoming more in common conversation. Actually, people are looking at it as a very normal thing, which is very odd for me, even in my family and stuff. They're like, "Oh yeah, I saw a coach here," and it's showing up in conversations. It's not an odd thing, but when I was showing up, it's like, what? You're gonna leave an engineering career to go into coaching? People are gonna pay you thousands of dollars to talk to you? Why would they talk to you, and why would they pay you? Like they couldn't, and to be honest, it was hard for me to explain it to begin with, and they didn't understand it. And the thing that made a big difference for me is that good thing, even from the beginning, I was connected to other coaches. And the more I realized that I didn't have that support and understanding in my own network, I had to be around other people who were more understanding of this. I had to be around other people who had done this before. That helped a lot, which you pointed out, that had I not had that, I might have made a different decision. That might have been the blow I needed to give up in that process. But the other side of it is one thing to understand, this comes up with clients as well. A lot of times when you're doing something new and completely weird, it's different, nobody has known about it. You share that with the people around you, they will be very negative about it, not because they're trying to hurt you. A lot of times they're trying to protect you. The people are, and at the time it doesn't feel like that. Actually, years later, I've had these conversations with especially with uh, with a couple of my family members who were very against what I was doing, and they were not helpful, and they were very close to me too. I'm like, and I went back to them, and because they're like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you, you did this." And I paused and I'm like, you remember that you were very unsupportive of this in the beginning, right? And I just brought it up to them just because people just forget as if nothing happened. I'm like, that had a big impact. I'm like, that was very unhelpful. And I actually came up around a time where they were being unsupportive towards somebody else. And I stopped. I'm like, do you remember when I was starting out years ago and you were saying that, oh, have you thought about this? That was just putting me down. It wasn't
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
Now you are proud of me, but at the time I needed support. I needed encouragement. Now you're doing the same thing to this other person. How do you think that person is feeling in this process? But it was a complete lack of awareness. They didn't even know they were doing that.
Yeah.
But to me, it was a big impact. And this is what happened. So when people around you are doing this, and by the way, this shows up with clients as well. And a lot of times I've actually seen coaches when they see negativity in their environment, oh, cut these people out. As like, have you considered why these people are being a certain way? That's not how life works, though. And there are times, of course, people can be abusive and other things, and you can distance yourself at times. And to be honest, I did distance myself with time, not completely, but I created a structure in my life. I'm like, I'm going to dedicate this time to my business and to my well-being and to my family, and whatever's left, I'm going to dedicate to. It gave me the space to think about it. But a lot of times coaches, when they're working with their clients, they don't explore this enough, and they
Yeah.
don't help their clients find out where they can get the support they need. And this will be true for you. If you are in a space where you don't have the support, you need a community. You need people who understand what you're doing, what you're going through. This is why even when people who are going through cancer, one of the first things that they do? They connect them with other people who are going through that stuff. Now, of course, this is not
Absolutely.
cancer, but just different knowledge.
Right. And so a couple scenarios in my own life, not related to coaching, but that are totally relevant about reacting to somebody that's negative. I remember about 4 years ago, I talked with my dad, my parents, for the first time about my idea about taking my kids to overseas to live for a period of time. We're still working on the plan up to this point. That conversation I had with him, like my dad, also, he's an engineer, very analytical. And he immediately went to, I could picture what was going through his mind by his words, because he immediately was like talking about all the challenges, all the problems, all of the potential pitfalls of living in another country with kids, all the things that could happen to them. And I remember hanging up the phone with him after that 25-minute phone call and just being deflated because I was so excited about the opportunity and all the positive things that it would bring based on my research and and all the things that I was kind of figuring out. And I felt like he totally deflated my balloon, and it felt miserable. And so I reflected on it and realized, he was coming from a place of love, of concern, of safety. Safety was his primary value in that moment. Mine was not safety. Not that I'm just going to throw my kids into the wolves, but I was coming from a different lens. And so my solution was not to cut my dad out of my life. I just didn't have that conversation with him anymore. I stopped talking to him about all of the exciting things I was learning about living overseas. It was that simple. And we went back to our normal pattern and our normal relationship, which is very loving. And so I just, so there's these moments, and, there's other scenarios in my family, my extended family, where I'm just like, oh, yeah, they don't respond well to that type of conversation. So I just won't bring it up.
But
Same
that
thing.
needs to be replaced by somebody, and that's the key. Is like, then
Absolutely.
who are you going to have that conversation with?
Absolutely. So then, yeah, I found a whole bunch of other people that have lived overseas and like stoked that ambition. So absolutely, it wasn't just that I stopped talking about it. It is shifting that energy to somewhere where it can be stoked and can go bigger. I think about it as you were talking earlier, Faisal, is like a fire, a campfire, and the oxygen is that positive influence. We need so much oxygen. But when we're around people that suck the oxygen, it's like putting something over the campfire, or a candle. If you ever put a clear glass over a candle, it snuffs out pretty quickly because it's consuming the oxygen and it's got nothing left. So
Yeah.
really that's what's happening when we're around negative people that are detracting from what we're wanting to do, or the positive people. So hopefully that imagery of all the great, amazing people who are also coaches who can help lead the way, help keep you excited, help keep your head in the game is like the oxygen that's abundant for a campfire.
Yeah, I love that analogy so much because in the beginning, I remember I used to get on these group calls. It was actually within CMC. I didn't know how much I needed it until I was in these calls, because
Mm.
all it took was I would share something that I was doubting everything at that point. Even though I was working, I was like, literally everything. I would share like, you know what, I'm trying this, and all it would take was one of the members would say, "Oh, that's really a cool strategy." Like, it is. I thought it was a horrible strategy. Tell me more. And then and they would take it and they would implement it. It's like, oh, okay, that's odd. And then that would motivate me to go do more of that. But there's no other person I could have shared that with in my network. They would have said that. I mean, to this day, it was funny. I was talking to one of my family members. She's running a different kind of business. And I was getting her to think about her business. So she wasn't really running it. She was working with somebody as a contractor, but she had the potential to create her own business because she had enough followers. She had enough people in her social media and circle to get her own clients. So I was trying to get her to think about it, and I was giving her some price points that I work with my clients. As I told her, she was shocked by it. She's like, "What? People pay you that much?" I was like, "Yes, that's not important. The important thing is what you." But because I was giving her price differences in different packages in different contexts, but she didn't get it. She didn't understand it because she's not in this world. She will, even if I elaborated a lot on it, she wouldn't, because she hasn't gotten that kind of help. She's not at that level. I get it. But in the past, had somebody said that, it would have created a lot of doubt in me. It was like, what? What? Maybe I shouldn't be charging people that much. Maybe I should be different. So it requires you to work with people, be around other people. Now, I want to add this other thing. It's interesting, it's around structure. It's very interesting when I run into coaches who come from different backgrounds. Many of them can be very structured, and for example, they would be project managers or engineers. They have an analytical mind, but for some reason, when they jump into entrepreneurship, they look at it a little bit oddly, which means that they have no structure around it. And if you don't have a structure, you don't have boundaries. You talked about boundaries. It's very hard for you. So, for example, one of the decisions that I made when I became very sincere about, I'm going to focus on this long term. I don't care how long it takes. So I dedicated about 15 hours of my week to the coaching business. It meant that at that time I'm working. I'm doing that time. I don't care if there was there were parties happening, or my wife needed something, or my kid, like, I had to communicate to my wife that this is my time to build my business. That is all I'm doing. And so it's on my calendar, which means that I'm sitting down figuring this out. So no matter what, and usually it ended up happening around times where I was after I would be done work, and I would be focusing a couple hours or 2 hours or 3 hours. And to a lot of people before that, it would look like, oh, it's an optional thing. No, for me, it's not an optional thing anymore. But I had to build a structure in my calendar to do that. Now, a lot of coaches don't have that, even though they
Mhm.
have the capacity to create something, that they don't have it. So they don't have a structure on, and they don't have a way to track that. They don't have a lot of coaches don't have calendar systems.
Yeah.
Whatever your system is, have some kind of system that keeps you on track, where you can actually, if somebody asks you, hey, can you do this for me? Or can you do this other thing? You would look at your calendar. First of all, let me look at my calendar. Second, until I look at that, I can't answer that question. And this is
Yeah.
why a lot of coaches can also be burnt out because they're trying to please a lot of other people on their path.
Mm,
Oh,
mm,
and it because they haven't solidified this path, it looks optional to others as well as it looks optional to them too. And going to that fire, in the beginning when you're starting out, that fire is very small and it's very fragile and it can be burnt out easily until gets enough oxygen where it becomes solid.
mm.
At that point, nothing matters. So at this point, like I don't need to be here constantly in my office. Why am I here? Because I'm excited to do this.
Yeah.
Why am I here? Because I want to build this. I want to take it to the next level. So I don't care who comes in. Like, I don't necessarily have to be here. I don't have to be here to make money. I'm not surviving. But if somebody comes, I'm focusing on my business. My wife
Yeah.
knows that. My family knows that. No matter what's happening, I can take time off whenever I want, but I don't. Why? Because this matters to me. I have a structure for my life, for my day. Just to add one last point, that in business you need structure, because business can create a lot of uncertainty and a lot of instability in our life, and our mind, by the nature of it, it needs some kind of structure. This is why we follow religions, for example. This is why we follow rules and principles. This is why we have frameworks and models. Why? Because our mind needs that stuff to make sense of the world outside. If you jump into business, you have no kind of structure for your day, week, year, you're going to struggle. And I would say take some time to sit down and work through that. And there are a lot of coaches who teach this stuff, but they don't actually do it themselves.
Yeah. As you were talking, it was reminding me of I don't know who said this. All I remember is the most important part is if you're going to cut, I'm totally butchering this, but if you're going to cut down a tree, like focus on,
Benjamin Franklin.
thank you. You need to sharpen the axe more than anything,
Yeah.
because if you have a sharp axe, the tree will go quickly. So,
So hold on, I remember it. I think if you had
okay.
1 hour to cut down a tree, if I had 1 hour to cut down a tree, I would spend 45 minutes sharpening my axe.
Okay. That's
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So when I think about the business, it's making sure that not only are you doing the work that's moving it forward, but that you're leaving enough time to strategize and reflect on what you've done and what you need to do next. Instead of, because I think there's three categories as I'm thinking of how we spend our time. There's the learning, which is great, but we end up doing too much of because it's safe and it feels like we're moving forward because our mind is growing, but we're not actually doing work when we're doing that. So there's a limit to the amount of learning that is beneficial at the front end. And so more of the time, I think, is spent doing the work, which means doing reach outs, doing strategy calls or discovery calls, doing coaching sessions. It's doing the things that actually scare us a little bit because we're being vulnerable and we're putting ourselves out there. That's the stuff that you want to spend most of your time doing. But don't forget about that quiet time, that buffer time where you're between things, or it's at the end of the day or the first beginning of the day, where you just sit and reflect. How is this going? What do I need to do different? What's working? Like, that's really important because that's what then guides the activity time. So I think all of those things are something to kind of think about as we're structuring our day.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And I mean, just as a last thing, I know we're talking about the realism behind this, or the how it works, and not to create realistic expectations around this. That doesn't mean you cannot be optimistic. I still think that I think the coaching path can be a really profitable path for anybody who wants to create it. But it's not like you jumping in as if you got a job and you're going to make six figures. That's not how it works. You actually need to build your skill sets as a coach. You actually need to understand different skill sets in business. You actually need to develop your network. You actually need to understand the terrain very well. You actually need to be around other people to understand how they're doing well. And on top of that, add the unpredictability of the marketplace, and especially in current times where things can be up and down. How can you pivot? That's a long learning journey. If this is a long-term path for you, it's definitely worth it. And you can create a profitable path, but also something that's very fulfilling. And I know a lot of coaches want to go towards this because they see a sense of fulfillment coming out of this process, and it is. And it surprises me a lot of times that I've been doing this a decade, and I always do a check-in at the end of even my one-on-one, especially my one-on-one calls, because at this point I have groups and I get to speak to at events, and I'm doing that more and more, but I still get a lot of fulfillment from my one-on-one calls, and I've kept that. And I do a check and I'm like, am I doing this just for the sake of business, or does this matter to me as well? And actually, it really does. And one of my concerns I had, what if this becomes boring? What if this becomes a thing that I want to do? Well, of course, my business has shifted. I do different things, but I still enjoy that. It still brings me a lot of fulfillment, and it's still challenging at times to work with people. And that's what I love
Yeah.
in this process. So really, this can be a really beautiful path. It can be a profitable path. It can be a fulfilling path. But ask yourself, is this a long-term path for you? If it is not, it probably isn't worth it for you to do this thing and then about 6 months later jump into something else.
Yeah.
And this for you to consider, for you to think about. And I wish I had somebody talking about this more in the past. Maybe I didn't come across them, but this would have been really useful for us to hear initially. And we definitely encourage you to think about these areas around community, your awareness around where you are. Do you have the right community around you? Are you building the right structure on your path? Are you looking at this as a long-term and sustainable path, or do you actually have a plan moving forward? If you don't have those things, more than likely you're burnt out, or you're about to be burnt out in the next few months or years.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up with making sure that I share kind of the conclusion of my story, because we talked about how there's some similarities between burnout on the front end and burnout when you're scaling. And so for me, what it was is I'd been in business for about 6 years. I had grown significantly. I basically, so I had a business, a mental health practice that was brick and mortar. I had bought 4 buildings through the process. I hired a lot of team members. I think at the time I had about 16 employees. We were grossing over $1 million a year. And
That's in sales, right?
yes, in client sales, in sessions. And I had all my systems in place. I had all that stuff dialed in, and it was going well. Where I got burnout was transitioning from being the key person in the business, the CEO, the chief human human resource officer, like I was everything at the top. I was everybody's supervisor. So I was transitioning and putting people in place to take some of those roles on, and so that I didn't have to be everything. And
Yeah.
as I was going through that process, I was kind of hitting up against some personality challenges and some expectation challenges on what they were doing versus what I thought I was communicating. And so there was a whole different skill set that I needed to have, and I was growing in as a leader. And but fundamentally, I think the flaw was the same. And the flaw was I felt alone. I didn't have any other business owners who had the same model of business that I had. And I was hitting these challenges, and I was reading and doing the best I can to learn everything to try to figure, but I didn't have anybody to really process any of this stuff with. It was way before virtual communities were the norm, and and abounding and stuff like that. I did end up finding a community of other mental health practice owners that had just kind of was new, but I didn't find it in time, and they didn't quite have everything I needed. And so I didn't have the resources. I didn't know where to go, and so I did the best I could. The best I could was insufficient to continue to grow and scale the business. And so that's how I got burnout. Is there was another skill set that was required of me that I was good at, but not good enough. And the solution again goes back to being in community with people that understand and that can help you, and can give you expectations on what the next steps in the business journey are going to be, and the resources to help you through that. So no matter where you are in the path of the beginning, of scaling, of growing, of whatever it might be, I really think the fundamental solution is the same, and that's being in community with other people that can speak into the journey that you're on, whether they're a little bit behind you, whether they're your peers, in the where you're at in your journey, or whether they're ahead of you. I think it's valuable to have kind of all of those available.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. I'm in that space where I'm trying to scale, and I've hired a few coaches and mentors who've actually burnt out. They've scaled really fast, and I actually specifically hired coaches who burnt out and they recovered. And I really liked their journey too. And one of the reasons they scaled too fast. There's every transition stage takes a lot, and one of the things that I've learned is do it incrementally and do it sustainably rather than doing it so fast where your skill sets haven't caught up yet, your systems haven't caught up, and you don't know how to build a team around you. Like all that stuff is very difficult even at the next level. And I've learned a lot from my coaches and mentors around that is that, hey, do it sustainably instead of trying to rush the process. And again, that requires a frame of reference. And this is why a lot of business owners pay thousands of dollars to be part of masterminds, to be part of a network of other business owners, investors at any level, because they want to understand what they're doing differently. And especially, and even Tony Robbins, when his business mastery talks about it, is that if you're a business owner who's built a business, and this was a few years ago, he said it, and for the past 5 years, you're crazy if you don't talk to other business owners, because it's the business cycles are so fast compared to before, especially with AI now, that you're not going to be able to keep up if you're thinking in your own or in your own space and running a business. It's a very different world. It's not as slow. So connect with other business owners, be in a community, and make sure you have a sustainable path.
Absolutely. So with all this talk about the solution to burnout, no matter where you are in your journey, being community, if you would like to know more about being in a community that can support you in a way to prevent burnout, go to cmc.coach. It's our website, and it will give you an opportunity to kind of start the journey of being in a community. It's not a certification with an endpoint. It's not like just a learning where it's going to be a bunch of things that are not interactive. It's you actually getting to genuinely build a relationship with other coaches. So incredibly powerful. So jump over to that website now to get more details, to be able to jump in and see what that's like, because that's gonna huge powerful way of being able to prevent the kind of, is saying prevent your demise, that sounds really ominous, but
To
I kind of
prevent
want to
your
say
absolute demise.
yes, yes, all that hard work you put in, don't let it go to waste.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we'd love to hear from you as well. Share your thoughts around where you're at. And like if you have you gone through this at whatever stage you're at in your coaching journey. Have you struggled with this stuff? Or maybe you were completely bullshitting. You can share your journey that might be completely different. Or another perspective that we haven't heard before. It would help anybody who is following this. But make sure you share your comments and share it with a coach that you might think is either close to burnout, or they are already burning out, or they've been trying this for a long time and they haven't been successful on this path. Definitely share this podcast episode with them, and we'll see you next week, same time.
Bye.